Stop listening to your friends about some red flags. They convinced me to dump my soulmate because of he never posted me on Instagram, and now I'm watching him build a life with someone who actually gets it. The first time I saw Mark, I didn't see a digital profile or a curated aesthetic. I saw a man. It was a chaotic Friday night at a mutual friend's house, the kind of party where everyone was obsessed with finding the right lighting for their stories. While a group of girls spent 20 minutes posing with their drinks in the kitchen, I noticed someone different. Mark was in the background, quietly gathering empty cans and wiping down the counter for the host. He wasn't doing it for praise or for a good person post. He was doing it because it needed to be done. That was my first glimpse of the substance beneath the surface. He was real in a world that felt increasingly filtered. Our first year together was nothing short of a whirlwind of real-world magic. It wasn't the kind of magic you see on a travel blog, it was the kind you feel in your bones. Mark had this uncanny ability to notice the things everyone else missed. He remembered that I liked my steak medium rare but charred on the outside. He knew that when I got stressed, I didn't want to talk. I wanted a specific brand of ginger ale and total silence. I remember one Tuesday when I was buried under a mountain of work at the office, battling a fever that made my head spin. I hadn't even told him I was sick, yet there he was at the reception desk with a thermos of homemade soup and a pack of my favorite tissues. He didn't take a photo of the soup to show his followers what a supportive boyfriend he was. He just kissed my forehead, told me to feel better, and left. At the time, I thought that was the highest form of love. He listened to my dreams with an intensity that made me feel like the absolute center of the universe. When I talked about opening my own gallery, he didn't just nod and say, "That's nice." He bought me books on business management and found local artists I should follow. He was building a foundation for my future while I was still just dreaming about the wallpaper. For 12 months, I lived in a bubble of security. I felt chosen. I felt seen. I felt like I had finally found the one person who understood that life happens in the quiet moments, not the loud ones. But as our second anniversary approached, the world outside our bubble started to bleed in. I am a person who lives online. My Instagram is my diary, my portfolio, and my social currency. Naturally, I wanted to share my happiness. I started posting him constantly. I posted the candlelit dinners he cooked, the muddy boots from our Saturday morning hikes, and the way the sunlight hit his face during our quiet Sunday mornings. In my digital world, we were the ultimate couple. We were the goals that my followers commented on. I loved the likes, the fire emojis, and the digital validation that told me my life was as perfect as it felt. However, a tiny, digital thorn started to prick at my heart every time I looked at his page. Mark's Instagram was a ghost town. He had a profile, sure, but his last post was a grainy photo of a sunset from 3 years ago. He had followers, but he never engaged. As the months rolled on, I waited for the soft launch. I waited for a photo of my coffee cup on a table, or a shot of my shadow walking beside his. I waited for a tag, a mention, a happy anniversary post, anything that would signal to the digital world that I existed in his life. But there was nothing. The silence on his end started to feel loud. It started to feel intentional. I would scroll through the feeds of my friends and see their boyfriends posting, "Man Crush Monday," photos or long, rambling captions about how much they loved their partners. Then I would look at Mark's blank grid and feel a cold pit form in my stomach. Why was I absent from his digital footprint? Was he ashamed of me? Was he trying to look single for someone else? The real-world magic of the soup and the steaks and the listening ears started to be overshadowed by a single, haunting question. I started to wonder if I was truly his girlfriend, or if I was just a secret he was keeping hidden away from a world he wasn't ready to let me into. Every time we went out, I became more focused on the camera than the companion. We would be at a beautiful viewpoint after a 2-hour climb, and instead of breathing in the fresh air and enjoying the achievement with him, I was checking my signal. I was tagging him in a story, waiting for that little notification that says, "Mark shared your post." It never came. He would tuck his phone in his pocket and look at the horizon, while I stood there staring at a screen, feeling invisible. The devotion. that once felt like a warm blanket now felt like a cage of anonymity. I began to rationalize my insecurity. I told myself that in 2024, if it's not on social media, it didn't happen. I started to believe the TikTok coaches who said that, if he doesn't claim you, he's hiding you. My brain began to rewrite our history. The soup at the office wasn't a gesture of love anymore, it was the bare minimum. The way he listened to my dreams was just him playing the part. I became obsessed with the optics of our relationship. I wanted the world to see what I had, but more than that, I wanted to see that Mark wanted the world to see me. Before I show you the exact moment the screen went dark on my relationship, ask yourself, is your partner a protector, or just a photographer? I'm peeling back the filters on a mistake that cost me everything. If you've ever felt like you were dating a ghost or a gallery, hit that subscribe button. We're diving into the side of couple goals that nobody wants to post about. I remember one specific night, we were celebrating a promotion I had worked months for. He took me to this incredibly exclusive rooftop bar. The view of the city was breathtaking, the cocktails were artisanal, and the atmosphere was electric. It was the perfect, hard launch moment. I looked at him, dressed in the navy blazer I had bought him, looking like a dream, and I asked him to take a photo of us. He did, without complaint. He took several. He made sure the lighting was right and that I looked my best. But when I asked him if he was going to post it, his face changed. Why does it matter if a bunch of strangers see this? He asked gently. We're here. We're celebrating you. Isn't this enough? I felt a surge of resentment. To me, his refusal wasn't about privacy, it was a rejection. It was a statement that I wasn't worth the grid space. I spent the rest of that night in a silent sulk, refreshing my own post to see the comments from people I barely knew, while the man who had actually supported me through the late nights and the stress sat across from me, ignored. I was so busy looking for a digital footprint that I was stepping all over the heart of the man standing right in front of me. This was the beginning of the end, the moment the unreasonable reason took root. I was ready to trade a king for a caption, and I had no idea how much that trade was going to cost me. The tension didn't stay confined to my phone screen for long. Eventually, it migrated into the very heart of our home. It started as a low-level hum of anxiety, but soon it was a vibrating force that sat between us at the dinner table. I remember one Tuesday night vividly. Mark had spent an hour in the kitchen making his signature carbonara. The steam was rising from the plates, the aroma of pancetta and fresh parmesan filled the air, and the lighting in our dining room was that perfect, warm amber glow. Any normal person would have picked up a fork. I picked up my phone. I spent 5 minutes adjusting the cutlery and moving the wine glasses to get the perfect shot. I wanted my followers to see the domestic bliss I was living in. But as I hit share, I looked over at Mark. He was already eating, unbothered, his phone face down on the counter where it had been since he walked through the door. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The question had been rotting in my mind for weeks. I asked him, as casually as I could manage, why he never soft-launched me. I told him I wasn't asking for a wedding announcement, just a picture of my hand resting on the table, or maybe a shot of my drink across from his. Something subtle, something that whispered to the world that he wasn't alone. He looked up from his plate and laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. It was the sound of someone who genuinely thought I was joking. He told me he lived his life in the moment, not in the cloud. He said that the people who mattered to him already knew he was with me because they had seen us together in person. To him, Instagram was a graveyard of vanity, a place where people performed happiness instead of experiencing it. But his logic felt like a personal insult because my friends were in my ear every single day. We had a group chat that acted like a 24-hour news cycle for relationship red flags. Every time I shared a screenshot of Mark's empty feed, they would pounce. They told me that in the modern world, a man who doesn't claim you publicly is a man who is leaving his options open. They whispered about stashing, the practice of keeping a partner hidden so you can still appear single to other prospects. They told me that if he really loved me, he would want to shout it from the digital rooftops. They turned my secure, loving relationship into a conspiracy theory. Every time I saw a friend's boyfriend post a Woman Crush Wednesday tribute, I felt a sharp pang of inadequacy. I began to believe that my worth as a girlfriend was directly tied to my visibility on his profile. The paranoia turned me into a version of myself I didn't recognize. I became a detective in a crime that hadn't been committed. I would wait until Mark fell asleep, the blue light of my phone illuminating my face in the dark, and I would scroll. I wasn't looking for cheating, not at first, but I was looking for something. I checked his followers list to see if he had added any new women. I scrutinized the likes on his old photos from years ago, wondering if any of those girls were still in the picture. I even checked the tagged section of his friends' profiles, hoping to find a photo of us that he had simply forgotten to share. I was hunting for evidence of betrayal to justify the emptiness I felt on his Instagram page. The more he pulled away from the digital spotlight, the harder I tried to shove him into it. It became a power struggle. If we went to the movies, I tried to take a selfie in the dark. If we went for a drive, I tried to record him singing. He started to recoil from the camera. He'd turn his head away or put his hand up, half joking but clearly annoyed. I interpreted his desire for privacy as a desire for secrecy. I told him he was being shady, while he told me I was being obsessive. The beautiful, quiet intimacy we had built over the last 2 years was being suffocated by my need for public validation. The love was still there, sitting right in front of me in the form of a man who worked overtime so we could travel, a man who fixed my car without me asking, a man who knew my every fear. But I was too busy looking for a like to actually feel his heartbeat. I started to view our relationship through the lens of a spectator. I wasn't asking myself, am I happy? I was asking, does this look like happiness to everyone else? I remember one afternoon we were at the park, and the light was hitting the trees in this breathtaking way. Mark was lying on the grass with his head in my lap, telling me a story about his childhood. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection. But all I could think about was how much better the moment would be if I could just get a high-angle shot of us. I reached for my phone, and I felt him stiffen. He didn't say anything, but he sat up and moved away. The connection was broken. I had traded a soul-deep conversation for a photo I didn't even end up taking. My friends' voices became the soundtrack to my life. He's hiding you, Sarah, they'd say over brunch. My boyfriend would never let a week go by without posting me. They made me feel like I was being settled for, like I was a placeholder. I started to compare Mark's silence to the loud, performative gestures of my friends' partners who, I knew for a fact, were often unfaithful or unkind behind closed doors. But in the twisted logic of my social media addiction, their public displays of affection made them better boyfriends. I was choosing the shadow over the substance. I was preparing to burn down a palace because the front gate didn't have a sign with my name on it. By the time our anniversary month hit, the living room felt like a courtroom. Every conversation led back to the same place. I'd bring up a soft launch idea, and he'd sigh, his shoulders dropping with the weight of a man who was tired of being interrogated. He asked me once, with tears of frustration in his eyes, why his physical presence wasn't enough. He asked why the way he held me every night didn't count as claiming me. I didn't have an answer that didn't sound petty, so I just cried and told him he didn't understand. I was so caught up in the red flags. My friends pointed out that I failed to see the biggest red flag of all. My own inability to trust a good man simply because he didn't want to play a character in my digital soap opera. I was looking for a sign from the world, while the person who loved me was standing right there, waiting for me to just put the phone down and look at him. The breaking point didn't happen in a moment of neglect, it happened in the middle of a masterpiece. My 25th birthday was supposed to be the milestone that changed everything, and in a way, it was. Mark had spent months preparing for it. He knew I'd been feeling suffocated by the city, so he found this stunning, secluded cabin tucked deep into the heart of the mountains. It wasn't just a rental, it was a sanctuary. He had saved up for months to afford it, planning every detail with a level of care that should have left me speechless. He had curated a playlist of every song that meant something to us, from the track playing during our first kiss to the indie ballad we danced to in the kitchen. He even hired a private chef to prepare a 5-course meal of all my favorites. It was, without question, the most romantic and selfless thing anyone had ever done for me. But as the sun began to set over the peaks, I wasn't looking at the view. I was looking at my notifications. In my mind, a milestone birthday demanded a milestone post. I had spent the morning getting ready, picking out the perfect, mountain chic outfit, and posing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was waiting for the digital tribute that would finally silence my friends and prove to the world that I was the queen of Mark's life. Midnight had passed with no post. Noon came and went with total silence from his account. By the time the private chef was plating our dessert, my phone was buzzing non-stop with tributes from acquaintances, distant cousins, and college friends. My feed was a sea of "happy birthday" messages, but the one account that mattered most remained stubbornly, chillingly dark. The internal pressure I had been building for months finally reached its boiling point. I couldn't even taste the expensive wine or the handcrafted chocolate. All I could see was that empty grid. To me, his silence wasn't just a preference anymore. It felt like an act of aggression. It felt like he was deliberately refusing to give me the one thing he knew I wanted. I snapped. Right there, under the soft glow of the cabin's chandelier, I dropped my fork and asked him why he was doing this to me. I asked him why, on the most important day of my year, he couldn't take 30 seconds to share a single photo of us with the world. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The warmth of the fireplace seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, heavy tension. Mark didn't get angry. He didn't yell. Instead, he looked at me with a look of pure, soul-crushing exhaustion. It was the look of a man who had given everything he had, only to be told it wasn't enough. He gestured to the room around us, to the hand-picked flowers on the table, the wine he had researched for weeks, and the fire he had built with his own hands. He told me, his voice cracking with a mixture of sadness and frustration, that his love was right there. He said his love was in the cabin, the food, the effort, and the 3 years of unwavering support he had given me. He told me that a caption was just words for strangers, but the life he was building with me was real. Why is their validation more important than my devotion? He asked. But I was too far gone. I was poisoned by the idea that if a love isn't seen, it isn't real. I told him that if he couldn't show the world he loved me, then he clearly didn't. I told him that I was tired of being his secret, and that I deserved a man who was proud to show me off. The logic of the group chat had fully taken over my brain. I looked him in the eye and delivered the ultimatum that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I told him that he had until the morning to post a photo of us, a real, public declaration, or I would be packing my bags and leaving the mountains alone. I thought I was standing up for my worth. I thought I was being a strong woman who knew what she deserved. The rest of the night was spent in a deafening silence. We lay in that beautiful, expensive bed like two strangers on opposite sides of an ocean. Every few minutes, I would reach for my phone, my heart racing, hoping to see that he had finally caved. I wanted to see that notification more than I wanted to feel his arm around me. But the screen stayed dark. Mark didn't move, he didn't scroll, he just stared at the ceiling until the sun began to peek over the mountains. When the morning light hit the room, the first thing I did was check his profile. Nothing, no story, no post, no change. He hadn't budged. I felt a surge of humiliated rage. I scrambled out of bed and began throwing my clothes into my suitcase, making as much noise as possible, waiting for him to stop me. I waited for him to grab my hand and say, okay, I'll post it, just don't go. But he didn't. He stood by the door of the cabin, watching me with a profound sadness, as if he was mourning someone who was already dead. He realized in that moment that I didn't love him for who he was. I loved him for who I wanted him to be on camera. As I zipped up my bag and walked toward the car, the reality of what I was doing started to blur with my pride. I was walking away from a man who knew my soul for the sake of people who didn't even know my last name. I was abandoning a partner who had saved for months to make me happy because he refused to perform for an audience. I looked back at the cabin one last time, hoping for a miracle, but Mark had already turned away. He had chosen his peace over my vanity. I drove down that mountain road, tears blurring my vision, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I had won the battle of wills, but I had lost the only man who ever truly saw me. I walked away from the best thing that ever happened to me, all because of a grid of pixels and a thirst for a like that could never fill the hole I had just punched in my own heart. Life after Mark was exactly what I had convinced myself I needed. For the first few weeks, I felt like I had finally stepped out of the shadows and into the light I deserved. I quickly met Tyler, a man who understood the digital language I spoke. He didn't just participate in my world, he mastered it. Within our 2 weeks of, Tyler did what Mark hadn't done in 3 years. He hard-launched me. It wasn't just a casual mention, it was a curated, 10-slide carousel on Instagram, complete with a poetic caption about finding his missing piece. My phone exploded with notifications. My friends were practically throwing a digital parade in the comments, cheering that I had finally found a man who truly valued me. For a moment, the high of that public validation was so intense that I managed to ignore the hollow ache growing in my chest. But as the months went by, the shimmering surface of my new relationship began to crack, revealing a chilling reality. Tyler was an expert at capturing the aesthetic of a happy couple, but he was a stranger to the substance of one. Every date became a production, a choreographed event designed for the lens rather than the heart. We would go to the trendiest brunch spots, not because the food was good, but because the lighting was perfect for a story. I spent more time watching him edit photos of us than I did actually talking to him. He'd spend 40 minutes meticulously adjusting the saturation, the contrast, and the grain of a picture from our dinner, ensuring we looked like the picture of romance. But the second he hit post, the magic vanished. We would sit in a deafening, heavy silence for the rest of the meal, both of us staring at our respective screens, waiting for the likes to roll in. The contrast between Tyler and Mark was a slow-acting poison. Tyler was great at taking my picture, but he had no idea how to read my face. He never noticed the slight downward turn of my lips when I was anxious, or the way I grew quiet when I was overwhelmed. With Mark, I never had to say a word, he was tuned into my frequency. Tyler, on the other hand, could look at me through a camera lens for an hour and still not realize I had been crying 5 minutes before. He was dating my image, my brand, and the way I made his profile look. He loved the idea of us, the version of our lives that existed on a 5-inch screen, but he was completely absent for the girl sitting right in front of him. I started to feel like a prop in my own life. I had the public, claiming I had screamed at Mark for, but I had never felt more invisible. I had thousands of people liking my relationship, yet I didn't have a single person to talk to when the world felt heavy. I found myself late at night, when the house was quiet and Tyler was asleep, probably dreaming of his next viral post, scrolling back through my old messages with Mark. I'd read the long, rambling texts he used to send me when I was stressed at work. He would check in on me 3 times a day, not because it made for a good story, but because he genuinely cared if I had eaten lunch. He would send me articles he thought I'd find interesting or voice notes just to make me laugh. Mark had been dating me. The messy, unedited, complicated version of me. Tyler was just dating a gallery of photos. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I had walked away from a man who knew my soul because he wouldn't show my face to strangers. Now, I was with a man who showed my face to everyone but didn't know the first thing about my soul. I remembered the cabin in the mountains, the private chef, and the playlist Mark had curated. I remembered how angry I was that no one else could see it. Now, everyone could see everything I was doing with Tyler, but there was nothing worth seeing. There was no depth, no private jokes, no shared history that wasn't meant for public consumption. I was living in a glass house, and while the view was beautiful to outsiders, it was freezing cold on the inside. I started to realize that public validation is a very poor substitute for private devotion. My friends' praise felt empty. They were applauding a lie. They saw the Man Crush Monday posts and told me how lucky I was, while I was sitting on the couch next to a man who couldn't tell you my favorite book if his life depended on it. I began to understand that Mark's refusal to post me wasn't about hiding me, it was about protecting me. He viewed what we had as something sacred, something that would be diminished if it was offered up for the judgment of the masses. He didn't want to share me because he wanted to keep me. One evening, Tyler asked me to move slightly to the left because my shadow was ruining the composition of a photo he was taking of our drinks. In that moment, something inside me broke. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who was more committed to his followers than to his partner. I realized that I had become exactly what I asked for, and it was a nightmare. I had traded a protector for a photographer. I had traded a life of substance for a digital facade. I sat there, surrounded by the beautiful lighting and the expensive cocktails, and for the first time in 2 years, I let myself admit the truth. I had made a devastating mistake. I had thrown away a man who loved me in the dark for a man who only wanted to be seen with me in the light. The final blow didn't come from a dramatic confrontation or a tearful phone call. It came from a 5-second clip on a mutual friend's story. I was lying in bed, mindlessly scrolling while Tyler was in the other room editing his latest vlog, when a familiar face flickered across my screen. It was a wedding for a friend we used to share, and there, in the background of a crowded dance floor, was Mark. My breath hitched. The final realization didn't just break my heart, it shattered the way I see every like and comment on my feed today. But before I tell you what I saw in that wedding video that changed my life forever, take a second to join our community here. I share these raw truths so you don't have to learn them the hard way. Drop a like if you're listening with your heart, not just your eyes. He looked incredible. Not the kind of incredible that comes from filters or professional lighting, but a raw, grounded kind of radiance. He looked peaceful. He looked present. He was caught in a candid moment, leaning in toward a woman I didn't recognize. They weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. They were laughing. A deep, genuine laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes in a way I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't a pose. It wasn't for the grid. It was just a moment, disappearing as quickly as the story moved to the next slide. Curiosity, or perhaps a masochistic need for closure, drove me to his profile for the first time in over a year. My heart hammered against my ribs as I waited for the page to load, bracing myself for the hard launch I had always demanded. I expected to see professional engagement photos, tagged tributes, or at least a profile picture of the two of them. But when the page finally opened, it was exactly as I had left it. His account was still private. His follower count was low. His grid was still a graveyard of grainy landscapes and old memories. There were no wedding photos, no public declarations of love, and no digital breadcrumbs of his new life. The realization hit me like a physical weight, knocking the wind out of me. He hadn't changed his philosophy. He had simply found someone who shared it. He had found a woman who understood that the best parts of a relationship are the ones that happen when the screen is dark. He found someone who didn't need a like to feel loved, and someone who didn't need a share to feel secure. Looking at that blank profile, I finally understood the truth that had been staring me in the face for 3 years. Mark hadn't been hiding me because I wasn't enough. He had been protecting our intimacy because it was everything. He moved on not because he stopped loving me, but because he realized I didn't value his character, I only valued his clout. I didn't want him. I wanted the version of him that made me look good to strangers. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the blue light of my phone casting a cold, ghostly pallor over the room. In the next room, I could hear Tyler's keyboard clicking away as he tagged me in yet another appreciation post. I knew exactly what it would say. It would be full of emojis and exaggerated praise, designed to generate engagement and maintain our couple goals aesthetic. It would be a beautiful lie. Tyler would tag my handle, but he wouldn't know that my favorite flower had changed, or that I'd been having nightmares about the mountains for months. He would show me to the world, but he would never truly see me. The regret was a slow, agonizing burn. I had played a high-stakes game of digital chicken and lost everything that actually mattered. I had traded a protector for a photographer. I had traded a man who would have walked through fire for me in silence for a man who wouldn't even walk to the grocery store without documenting it. I realized that while I was busy counting followers, Mark was counting moments. While I was focused on the soft launch, he was focused on the long haul. I had sacrificed a soul-deep connection on the altar of public validation, and now I was left with a gallery of beautiful photos and an empty heart. I thought back to that birthday weekend at the mountain cabin. I remembered the smell of the pine trees, the warmth of the fire, and the look of absolute, devastating disappointment in Mark's eyes when I gave him that ultimatum. I remembered the weight of the diamond necklace he gave me, a gift I barely acknowledged because I was too busy checking my notifications. If I could go back to that moment, I would throw my phone into the fireplace. I would sit on that rug, put my head on his chest, and listen to the silence of the woods. I would tell him that he was enough, that we were enough, and that the world didn't need to see us for us to exist. But life doesn't have an undo button. You can't edit out the choices that break your own heart. Mark was gone, living a beautiful, private life with a woman who knew the value of a secret. And I was stuck here, trapped in a curated cage of my own making. I reached for my phone, a habit I couldn't seem to break, and saw the notification. Tyler tagged you in a post. I didn't even click it. I just turned the screen off and sat in the dark, finally realizing that the only thing more painful than being unseen by the world is being claimed by someone who doesn't know who you are. I had won the war for the hard launch, and my prize was a life spent in the most public kind of loneliness. I traded a lifetime of substance for a digital facade, and now I'm living with the ghost of what if. But I want to hear from you. Be honest. If your partner never posted you again, would you feel secure in their love, or would you feel invisible? And if you've ever caught yourself performing for a post instead of living the moment, tell me your story in the comments. I'm reading every single one.